Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Just a little background. I'm kind of speaking as a 22-year veteran of the service in the Army.
Thank you for your service.
You're welcome. I noticed, many times you've made many statements praising Connecticut's military veterans and service members, past and present. But what I'd like to ask is how you can praise the sacrifices they've made on one hand, and on the other hand, work so diligently, along with other members of the legislature and all, to erode the constitutional rights that these men and women gave so much of themselves for concerning firearms ownership by citizens.
Sure. So let me, first of all, say I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe in our own state's constitution. I also believe, as Justice Scalia said in the Heller case, if I have the right case, that there are limitations with respect to that. And he's, by the way, probably the most ardent defender of the rights that you speak about, and he's admitted that there are limitations. Nothing I'm doing or trying to do wasn't done in this country before 2004. That's a reality. But I want to be very clear that neither you or I get to decide whether something's constitutional. That's the job for the courts. We have a legislative branch that has to decide what they're going to do with laws. I don't get to pass laws myself. I advocate, and I've told you what I've advocated for. But I don't get to pass laws. And if they pass laws, the courts get to decide whether they're constitutional or not. Neither you nor I sit on that court, either in Washington or in Hartford. It's an independent body, and that judgment will be made. But I'll remind you that there was no success in challenging the assault weapons ban as it existed prior to 2004. So from 1994 to 2004, there were numerous challenges to that assault weapons ban in the United States. Not one succeeded. So when we talk about what are and what aren't rights, we always have to understand that rights are defined by the document as interpreted by the judiciary, not by the legislature and not by the government. And that's what you fought for.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
Thank you.
So next is Peter Sanderson on the budget, followed by Elizabeth Mays, talk about jobs, and then Jim Lightman, talk about guns.
Good evening, Governor Malloy.
Good evening.
I'd like to thank you for your service to the state of Connecticut. I know you probably don't hear that all too often, but in certain settings, but I think in many ways you're doing a remarkable job, and you maintain your composure throughout all of these obstacles, and it's admirable.
Thank you.
Having said that, you knew that was coming. So
I'm
this
in
is,
this debate. I'm used to that.
well,
Anytime
exactly.
my brother starts with a compliment, I know I'm in trouble.
You know something else is coming. So basically, this is about the budget. This should be a relatively easy one, and it's just, I've been analyzing, quite frankly, the Connecticut budget, looking at all the facts and figures, corresponding back and forth with Kevin Lembo and Ben Barnes, both of whom are gentlemen. They've provided me with all kinds of
Yeah,
information.
but neither of them told me about you.
Well, and it's interesting. It's interesting because Ben, I know when he receives an email from me, he thinks, "Oh my God, concerned citizen." But anyway, so this pertains specifically. I'll keep it narrowly focused. This is specifically about overtime usage in the state of Connecticut and the relationship with overtime usage and pensions. And the direct correlation, it's just not working. It's not working as a long-term viable solution. We can't afford it in the state. It's interesting, you just mentioned with respect to the natural gas usage and Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and New Jersey, those three states don't include overtime in their pensions. So anyway, I just wanted to loft that up there.
Yeah, listen, I was mayor of a city for 14 years, and I didn't do it there either.
Right.
But there is a reality that the state has signed a series of agreements that codify, in essence, at least through processes, that is something that the state did. has an outstanding agreement with all those folks who retired already and all those folks who started their employment already. And by the way, relatively few people have started employment under my administration. In fact, we're down 1,200 positions on my side of the budget. 1,200.
Yeah.
In many ways, I inherited that problem.
I know you did.
So, you know, I came into a state, $3.6 billion. I'm just going to explain a couple things, and you know, we're getting through a lot of calls or questions, so let me spend a couple minutes and explain. So I inherited a state with a $3.6 billion deficit, representing 17% of revenue, on a same services budget, where every dollar that had been put in the cookie jar had been expended, where the state had already borrowed $1 billion on Wall Street to protect itself from having to make changes, and had agreed to borrow another $1 billion, up to another $1 billion to do the same, and took ARA money, or the stimulus money, and spent it in such a way that they basically continued to underwrite state expenses. You know, and I know, that's what I inherited.
Yeah.
And so what I then said is, hey, listen, at 17% of revenue, it's too big to tax our way out of it. We're not going to raise taxes 17%. It's too big to cut our way out of it, because we couldn't cut 17% and meet required expenditures by the federal government for things like Medicaid or a LEA program, which my predecessor had agreed to, although underestimating the total cost. And I also said that we had to go to our employees and renegotiate. Now, I did the best I could. And in doing the best I could, we developed a system where we're saving $13.3 billion in post-employment benefits savings. This July 1st, every state employee will begin paying into post-employment benefits. When I started on January 5th of 2011, only those people who had joined state employment since 2009, in fact, July 1 of 2009, were paying into post-employment benefits. I'm still paying into it. I didn't get a reprieve, but everybody else starts paying July 1. That fact will, and other changes to other post-employment benefits, that's health and the other things, the non-pension. That and it's not my estimate. This is an independent actuarial estimate of $13.3 billion. We then changed pensions, extended service, extended ages. We did all of that stuff. That brings, between the pensions and other post-employment, our total savings to about $21.5 billion. Certainly more than $20 billion. So there's a couple of different estimates that might argue about $1 billion. And then we said we're going to expedite how we are funding those pensions to move it to an actuarial basis. Because my two predecessors had entered into agreements where they kicked the can down the road and weren't funding those on an actuarial basis. By doing that, we locked in another $5.8 billion in savings. So we're at $26, $27, $28 billion in savings over a 20-year period of time. On top of which, the employees gave up about $600 million a year in additional revenue. Now, not great work, but nothing to sneeze about. In fact, when I say not great work, you can't find a state that produced that level of savings on a per capita basis. And we did it in a negotiation. Now, understanding that we got to, 21 of that, plus the additional 5.8 plus by actuarially funding it. First governor to ever do that, by the way, in our state, on a negotiated basis. And we tried lots of different negotiations. And what some governors had given, we got back. And in some areas, what some governors had given, we didn't get back. And that's the long answer to your question. Having said that, we are on a much firmer footing than we were on January 5th, 2011, as a result of $26 billion in savings. Over $1 billion a year